national defense. And this is different for club goods, for instance, where, think of a golf club, the excludability of people from this golf club, the limiting of access, is part of the survival strategy of that golf club. It needs to be exclusive of some kind. Within the golf club, however, there's not really a rivalry in consumption, where an additional member does not necessarily take away my possibility of playing golf in the club. So the definition of what a good is may depend, obviously, on socio-historical institutions and conditions. It's always not clear-cut. But one of the, let's say, sociologically most interesting cases is obviously here these goods that require either a collective arrangements about using them or a collective arrangements about bringing them into place. And here it's interesting to draw on Menckery-Olson's theory, the logic of collective action, where Olson mentions a couple of conditions that make the provision of these collective goods more or less easy. So he starts from just this little bit of a model world where there are self-interested, again, rational actors which are in front of the problem of forming a group or acting collectively. Think of a government, think of just a small group, right? They want to buy like a fridge for the shared flat. Think about a corporation again. And Olson basically observes that the logic of collective action is different depending on the size of the group, because in small groups, it's more likely that these collective goods are organized. Why? Because, well, the costs for producing these goods are lower. There may be some actors who are particularly motivated to just finance it all, for instance, right? They have a strong interest. There's a strong also mutual sanctioning mechanism involved. So it is more difficult to free ride for actors who don't want to contribute money for the joint fridge, for instance. There's more monitoring and sanctioning going on than in larger groups. So these kind of costs are lower. Whereas in larger groups, so think about corporations, democracies, or markets, then the costs for an individual to finance it all become too high. And there is, in a way, an apathy, a rational apathy even, to contribute anything, because the individual contribution is so low that you think it doesn't make a difference. So why should I vote, for instance, right? Rational apathy in voting, or also in contributing something to the tax system. And it's much more difficult also to organize a strong subgroup in order to sort of set up more oligopolistic structures in the market. It's much more costly also to monitor and sanction the agreements within such a collusion of firms, for instance, such that Olson sees as one of the main solutions to this problem of collective action just the coercive power of the state. So that in the prisoner's dilemma logic also, you would need, for instance, the mafia boss to offer very strong sanctions in case that there is a confession by these two criminals. So that coercion is one of the solutions also of this logic of collective action, but also to the prisoner's dilemma. A different solution would obviously be sanctions that are sort of mutually put in place among the two criminals. or also, I mean, sociologists would say the development of trust-creating institutions, such that the one criminal could trust the other, that basically he or she would not confess. Okay, so these were all rational choice approaches that explained already the failure of individual level approaches in rational choice to explain collective action outcomes. All of these approaches have also acted in or operated in a rational choice world, which works with a preference set of rational choice theories. And this is different in yet another game that I wanted to present to you, which is the so-called discursive dilemma. The discursive dilemma is a little bit different when compared to the previous games, because it uses propositions instead of preferences in order to organize the payoff matrix. Yeah? And it's not necessarily basically a game where maximizing of utility is the goal, but decision-making that is consistent. And here's the situation that organizes this dilemma. So take a university committee that has to decide whether to give tenure to a junior academic. That is the outcome or conclusion. The requirement for tenure is excellence in both teaching and research. So there are two reasons or premises. And the first among three committee members thinks the candidate is excellent in teaching, but not in research. The second thinks she is excellent in research, but not in teaching. And third thinks it's excellent in both. So a majority considers the candidate excellent in teaching. A majority considers her excellent in research, but only a minority, the third committee member, thinks the candidate should be given tenure. So this situation can be modeled in the following payoff or decision-making matrix, yeah, where we have the two premises here of the logical rule is the modus ponens, right, where I conclude R the conclusion given that the two premises are true, yeah, or are voted for in this case. So if P and Q is the case, then yes, also R is the case. If the candidate has research and teaching, then she's given tenure. Now we have the three different judges here in that committee, and they all have different preferences about sort of whether she's good in teaching and research, and hence also when you read the lines, right, their individual level conclusions are somewhat different. Now, the question is a little bit, how should the committee then decide? How should these individual level opinions about the candidate be aggregated? And now Christian List here and Philip Pettit came across a paradox in that aggregation process of individual level decisions, where on the one hand, this group could just aggregate the individual opinions about whether research and teaching is present or not. And here the majority rule says that yes, it's given. And hence, if you apply the logical rule of the modus ponens, so if both P and Q are true, then R, then the majority decision should be yes, we take the candidate. But if you apply the, as an aggregation process, a democratic rule on the individual level conclusions, right, then we have two no's against one. So this, by rule of aggregation, the simple majority rule in democracies is a no. And here you have a contradiction, right, going on between aggregating through rationality on the group level, the individual level opinion majorities on the premises on the one hand, versus on the other hand, aggregating the individual level conclusions. Yeah? What does this discursive dilemma then also tell us? So First of all, it's close to, you may have heard this, the Arrow's impossibility theorem, that it is impossible to derive a welfare function from individual sort of welfare preferences. So here we also have a case where it's difficult or it's impossible to derive a sort of a consistent group level opinion about the candidate given the individual level opinions, even though all of these rationality assumptions are given. So we have a complete, consistent, logically closed set of propositions on the individual level. And even though we have very, let's say, consensual aggregation rules, such as the simple majority rule in democracies. So what happens here now is that the dilemma is that on the one hand, this group now can decide, this is the one horn, to maintain epistemic norms of being a rational actor on the group level, right? And being consistent with the group decision that this is the candidate to be taken as the conclusion of the individual level premise majorities. Or the other horn, to be ethically consistent by maintaining the simple majority rule that prescribes that no, the candidate should not be taken because the aggregation of these individual level conclusions is no, there is a majority against the candidate. And the dilemma is basically, should the group then be epistemically or ethically consistent? A little bit more generally, then this kind of dilemma occurs more and more the group sort of has a history of past positions to be taken. And in general, Philip Pettit and Christian List have used this dilemma in order to argue against the singularist position that says there is no such thing as group actorhood, because group actors are always reducible to the sum of individual level opinions or preferences, propositions about the group. And we see in this very case, this is a very common case occurring in many groups. There is a clear impossibility of this group to form on the basis of individual level aggregations. So the group thinking is basically happening at the moment when the group has to think about this dilemma: should it be epistemically or ethically consistent or not? And as a result, constitute itself as a group actor.